Hi, welcome to the Everywhere Book Fest. I'm Erin Entrada Kelly, and I'm thrilled to lead the discussion today for It's All Relative Sibling Stories in Middle Grade Fiction. So I'll briefly tell you about my latest book, and then I would love to introduce each of our incredible panelists so they can tell you about theirs. So my book, We Dream of Space, releases on May 5th, and it's about three siblings who are growing up in Park, Delaware. It is set in the weeks leading to the Challenger disaster, so it's January 1986. And they have a kind of a dysfunctional family life, a toxic home environment. So it's all about how these three siblings, who are all in 7th grade together, kind of figure out what it means to be a family and kind of make their own family within that environment that they're in. So that's We Dream of Space. And now I'm going to introduce each of our amazing authors, and I'm going to start with Renée Watson. So Renée, in addition to many accolades and honors, is a Newbery Honoree and received the Coretta Scott King Award. And today she is going to tell us about ways to make sunshine, I believe. So Renée, would you like to tell us about your latest book?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Ways to Make Sunshine is about a 4th grader named Ryan Hart, and her name means king. So her parents are always telling her, we named you that for a reason. We want you to be a leader. We want you to live up to your name and be who we named you to be. So the book follows her trying to live up to this big legacy, this big name. And along the way, she makes some mistakes and realizes how competitive she is and how sometimes she can be a little bit selfish, but she also is figuring out how to make sunshine, how to bring joy into people's lives and how to make the best of situations. So it's kind of my ode to Ramona. I grew up in Portland where the book takes place, and I wanted to write a brown girl growing up in Portland, just having fun and doing all kinds of shenanigans in her hometown.
And Renée, really quickly, are you a sibling? I forgot to mention, since this is sibling stories,
yes.
I am a younger sibling. I have an older sister who's 3 years older named Anna. So what about you? Are you a sibling?
So yes, I am the youngest of 5.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I'm the baby, and I adore them. They were pretty good to me growing up.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay. So next we have Susan Muaddi Darraj, and in addition to her many accolades, she is a recipient of the Arab American Book Award and the American Book Award. And Susan, do you want to tell us about FARAH?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be with you all today and with this wonderful panel. Yeah, my book is called FARAH Rocks 5th Grade. That's Farah Hajar. It's actually a chapter book series, and this is the first book in the series. And Farah is a 5th grader. It's the first series with an Arab American protagonist in it, so I'm very excited about that. Farah is an older sister. She has a younger brother named Samir, and he's in kindergarten. He has some learning challenges, and he starts to get bullied. And Farah doesn't really know how to get some help. Some of the adults don't seem to really be listening very well. And so she decides to take matters into her own hands to protect her baby brother. And I'm an eldest of 4. I have 3 younger brothers.
Wow. All right. Thank you, Susan. I feel I just have my one sister, so we're like a little small family now, comparatively. So,
right.
And then we have our debut author on the panel. Congratulations on your debut, Sarah.
Thank you.
Stars Are Made Of? Please tell us about your book.
Yeah. So What Stars Are What Stars Are Made Of is about Libby Monroe. She's 12 years old, and she was born with a genetic disorder called Turner syndrome. And so growing up, she always felt a little bit different from everyone, but she's also super enthusiastic and optimistic. And so it was never anything to hold her back. And so when her big sister comes home and announces that she's pregnant, Libby is super excited. But because she's also really into science, she knows about some of the problems that can happen in a pregnancy. And, with a baby, like a lot of the things that happened with her. So she makes a deal with the universe and her favorite real life scientist lady from history. She makes a deal with the universe to make sure that the baby will be born healthy and perfect and safe with none of the issues that she herself has had to deal with. So that's what stars are made of. And I am a sibling. I'm the oldest of 8. So there's
wow. Okay, you win.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. It sounds like Libby and Bird in my book would be friends because Bird is an aspiring astronaut. She dreams of being the first female shuttle commander for NASA.
Awesome.
Yeah, so they would be like besties. Okay, great. So since this is a panel about siblings, and obviously each of our book feature a sibling dynamic, let's just delve right in. So Renee, in your book, Ryan has an older brother named Ray, and as someone who had an older sibling who was often overshadowing me, I'm not ashamed to admit, I understand the dynamic between 2 siblings, especially an older sibling. And so Ryan and Ray kind of they squabble, they have these little, they have their differences, but at the end of the day, they kind of come together to love and support each other. So I'm curious what your inspiration was for their relationship, and kind of can you speak to what informed your writing of Ryan and Ray?
Sure. Yeah. So Ryan is the things that are good about her are the quiet things, right? Things that are not, like her brother even says, you're good at a lot of things. They're just not things that can be like on a stage. He's performative. He can rap. He has been in talent shows and won them. He's very outgoing and extroverted. And she's very compassionate and sharing and, thoughtful. And so she's in his shadow because she kind of feels like he's so much better than her. And when it comes to talent, that can be seen. So I am the youngest of 5, like I said, and I went to the same school, the same high school and middle school that my siblings went to. And so when I arrived, it was always like, the last Watson is here. And they were all like straight A students and in band and leadership and this and that. And I'm like this quiet girl writing in my journal. So I didn't intentionally make it that way in the book when I was writing. I didn't realize that was coming up. But afterwards, I was like, oh, their dynamic, I get it, because I get it really, that I was very much quiet, and my sisters were super popular and kind of big personalities. And so, Ryan and Ray kind of have that dynamic going, but he's also caring and he loves his sister, even though he does, he's a brother. And so they definitely have their moments where they're not getting along, but I wanted to also show the tenderness between brother-sister relationships, because I adore my older brother, and he was always very kind to me, and I wanted to kind of tribute that in the book as well.
And what's really interesting? So when I was growing up, I always wished I had an older brother instead of the older sister that I had. And partly because she was very popular. She was, on the homecoming court, and she was the cheerleader, and she played volleyball. And I was like you, I was in my room, and nobody gives you trophies for staying in your room and reading for like 4 hours. But I certainly would have earned that. But I felt like if I had a brother, maybe I wouldn't be so overshadowed and be compared to. But I think it doesn't matter, right? Also, you will compare yourself to your older sibling, especially if that older sibling is all the things that you mentioned. I mean, that's going to happen naturally, right? Because young people are very hard on themselves. And hopefully we could talk a little bit more about that too later. Because in all of our books, the young people can take on a lot of self-responsibility for themselves and their families and their siblings. So Susan, in your book, we kind of have the opposite. We have an older sibling perspective, and she has a younger brother, Samir, which you mentioned. He's being bullied, and it's a very endearing relationship because it's an older sister who feels very protective of her younger brother. So can you tell us a little bit about, what informed your writing of Samir and Farah?
Well, one thing that's important to know about Farah and Samir is that they're both from a family that struggles with money. Their parents are really struggling. They're financially on the edge there. And what happens in families like that is that kids are always aware of that. Kids are always aware that their parents are struggling with money issues. I mean, I was aware of it when I was growing up. And so Farah has that sense of responsibility that sometimes the eldest sibling in a family will take on. Like, I know when I was growing up, my parents worked all the time. My parents are immigrants, and so they basically arrived in America with very little money, and we struggled for a long time. And as the eldest of four, I always felt like I had to help. Like I felt very responsible, and that they never made me feel that way or put anything on me, but I always felt like I had to do more to help the family. And I think that informed my sense of FARAH. She's always taking care of her little brother. She's babysitting him. She's actually cooking for him. She's helping him with his homework. And she takes that on herself, and she's proud to be this kind of responsible big sister. And it's also why she doesn't want to upset her parents, who are already so stressed about money issues when the bullying starts to happen. She decides that she's going to handle this on her own. And I felt like I probably did a lot of stuff like that. I took on a lot of things that I probably should have talked to an adult about. My youngest brother is 10 years younger than I am. So I was, I did everything for him, for example. But there are times when kids take on a lot more than they really should be taking on. And so FARAH struggles with when to know that it's time to ask for help.
Yes, and that's a really good segue. First of all, it speaks to what I just mentioned about how young people take on a lot of responsibility that nobody necessarily asked them to take on. But,
Right.
I think all of us when we were young, and young people today, feel like they're responsible for their family's happiness or the environment that they're in. And Sarah, that is a perfect way to kind of describe the dynamic going on in your book, because again, we have a family with financial struggles, and Libby is, in this case, the younger sister, and she has an older sister who is pregnant, right? And Libby feels she's concerned, she's worried for them because they have financial troubles, and kind of going to what Susan was speaking about, Libby's very aware of that. And so she feels kind of responsible, or she takes on the responsibility for her older sister. So could you tell us a little bit more about that dynamic?
Yeah, absolutely. Like Susan mentioned, there's when you have a lot of people in your family, so like the 10-year age gap, there's a 16-year age gap between me and the youngest in my family. And so when you're growing up as the youngest with a sibling who is that much older than you, you're watching them kind of move into adulthood. And so it feels like that journey feels like part of your own as well, even if you're only 12. So I know, looking at my youngest sister, she's very much like aware of everything that all of her older siblings are going through. And, maybe it's an older sister thing as well, but I think every sibling, you want to protect your family. And it is that kind of sense of responsibility of like, it's almost sometimes harder to go through something difficult yourself than it is to watch a sibling go through it. And so, wanting to just do everything you possibly can to help your sibling. And I wanted to confront that disparity of, being 12 years old and seeing your 20-year-old sister going through some, hard financial things. And what can you really do about that when you're 12? But then that conflicting with like this absolute loyalty and this desire to do something. So that's sort of where that dynamic comes from.
Yes. And that's definitely, I can definitely feel that, where with siblings, one of the things that I love about writing sibling relationships is that I would say one of the best things about having a sibling or siblings in all of your cases is it's someone else who kind of understands where you come from in a unique way that other people do not, because you live in the same household, and you kind of have all this shared history in your childhoods, etc. So that kind of answers the question that I'm about to pose to you, that comes from Marta. And Marta is 10 years old, and she lives in Colorado, and she sent us a question, and the question was, what is the best thing about having a sibling? So I feel like the best part, Marta is an only child, and my daughter is an only child. She loves being an only child, by the way, because all the attention is on her. But I would say one of the best things is that shared sense of understanding. What do you guys think? Does anyone else have thoughts on kind of the best part about being a sibling or having siblings?
Go ahead, Sarah. I saw you.
Well,
Go ahead.
as an older sister, it was really fun to have people to boss around. I was
See,
always
that's
the
what
one-
I needed.
I was going to say, as the youngest, it was really good to have people to look up to and also kind of like know what mistakes not to make. And like, you know, I learned a lot about, oh, I better not do that. My mom doesn't play. And so I feel like I avoided a lot of teenage drama and angst because I saw things that went down with my older siblings. So just having those examples and mentors right there was I loved that. Yeah.
It's true. As an older sibling, you have all these rules and like, you know, the rules and you follow them. And then by the time you get to the one 16 years later, the parents are like, do what you want.
We have a joke in my family that the parents who raised me are not the same parents who raised my brother, who's 10 years younger than me. They're just different people. But the thing I liked about being an older sister is that I feel like I got treated like an adult, like from the very beginning. I mean, I remember being consulted about my brother's choices of colleges and high school classes. Like my parents would consult me about things, and that was pretty neat, I think. I mean, there was a lot of responsibility too, but that was an interesting way to be treated as a kid.
And you know, Marta also asked, of course, what is the worst part about having a sibling? So I don't know if I want to use the word worst, but kind of speaking to a little bit of what each of you have said, I would say one of the challenges, we'll say challenges of having a sibling, at least for me, is that kind of on the other side of what Renee said about being able to see people move through adulthood and knowing what mistakes not to make. For me, one of the challenges was that sense of now you have something to be compared to. Mm-hmm. And in my situation, because my sister was all these things that I thought, you know, I wasn't, or that I should be, and she was popular and life seemed very easy for her and breezy. So I kind of had not only something for other people to compare me to, you know, like if I walk into a room and someone says, oh, you're Anna's sister, and that kind of becomes your identity. But also something for me to compare myself to. So I don't know if I'd want to say worst parts of having a sibling, but definitely that sense of comparison, if that makes sense. So what do you guys think about that?
On the flip side of that, as the eldest, what was very difficult was being held to the standard of being a role model.
Oh,
you mess up because your younger siblings are watching you. So that was, you know, kind of the opposite situation.
That's a really good point. Yes.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying, Erin. I just felt immense pressure to like live up to who my sisters, in particular my sisters. My brother, we have such big age gaps. So my brother is 15 years older than me. There's a huge age difference in our family. But my sisters, who are a little bit closer in age, I just felt like I needed to make them proud. And I did not want to kind of let them down because they were such good, like you were saying, Susan, they were good role models. And so there's no excuse. Like I've had 4 people before me who did quite well. And so I need to not be the one to mess that up. And I really felt that kind of, I don't know, burden, but it was really, I did that to myself. I don't know that people expected that of me. It was just my own kind of internal pressure.
Yeah, and that kind of speaks to how when we're young, we can be so unkind to ourselves, unnecessarily so. You know, I remember I would actually, now this is sad, I would actually like make a list of all the things that my sister was and all the ways that I did not live up to whatever that she was. And it's not as if my parents obviously didn't do that to me. I was doing it to myself because, you know, when we're growing up and all of us who are writing middle grade fiction, I think that's one of the things that draws us to that, is that it's that feeling of not being good enough or trying to figure out who you are and how you stack up to not just your siblings, but everyone else. And it's such a, you know, a resonant time in everyone's lives, and having a sibling relationship informs a lot of that, a lot of what you go through at that age. So Sarah, what are your thoughts on the challenges? Because I mean, you won the award for the most siblings. So you have, I can't remember how many you said. Was it like 25 or something?
Yeah, something like that. There's that joke from Bill Cosby that was like, after the fifth one, they just kind of walk out. No. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's the worst thing, but definitely one of the most surprising things has come up recently as we're all getting older, is how differently we view our shared experiences. That you think they're these shared experiences, and they are, you are looking at them completely differently. And that's just been a really surprising thing. Like, oh wait, I don't remember it that way at all. But and you know, with 8 of us, there's like 8 different memories of the same thing. So that has been really interesting.
Yeah, and you know what? I would think that can be kind of the double-edged sword, right? Because you know, if you feel like you were challenged in ways that your siblings were not because they had a different set of parents, that can create some tension, I would imagine.
Yeah, and it goes both ways too, where you have like siblings that got in trouble a lot more than I did, and who are like, wait, mom and dad never like made you do this, or they, you know, and like that comparison, like what we were talking about. But it's like, wait, I thought we were in the same house.
Yes, exactly. And speaking of houses that have lots of siblings, lots of family members, one of the things that I wanted to explore in We Dream of Space is that you can be alone anywhere. And by that, I mean, you know, there's 3 siblings in this book, and they have 2 at-home parents. So there's 5 people living in the home, but yet each of the siblings feels very lonely and alone. And I think, you know, one of the things that is interesting to me is, even if you have a big family, even if you have people around you, kind of going back to that idea of young people being very hard on themselves and often unkind to themselves, is you can have this big family and you can have all these siblings sharing an experience, but you can still feel alone, right? You know, even if you're close to your siblings and etc. You know, because I've heard people say, oh, it must be nice to have siblings because then you're not alone. Or, you know, when I had my daughter, since she's an only child, people would remark to me and say, oh, is she ever going to have a brother or sister to play with so then she doesn't have to be alone? And, you know, of course you can be alone anywhere, right? So that's one of the things that I wanted to explore too, is the interiority of each of our characters within that sibling dynamic. So like Renee, whenever you were talking about Ryan and how her parents kind of bestowed, for better or worse, this name on her, there's a lot that comes with that, right? So, you know, she has moments of not feeling like, am I living up to this name? Am I doing what I need to be doing? So it's just a very interesting dynamic, right?
Yeah, and her brother his name means protector. So he's being told by the parents, you know, look out for your little sister. And so there's a lot of gender stuff too, where he's like, you know, treating her like she's so fragile and she's this delicate flower. She's like, look, I want to race bikes with you and your friends. Like, stop treating me like I can't hang with the boys because I can hang, you know? And so, yeah, there's a lot of just like, who am I versus who does my family want me to be? That is playing out in the story as well.
And that's kind of a switch of FARAH in your book, Susan. Because she's the older sister, right? So she's the girl and her brother, and she's the protector of her little brother, who's obviously a boy. So it's kind of like another look at that dynamic.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of Arab American families, you know, the older girls are treated like the little mommy, and that's a lot of, you know, burden on them. And so that happens to FARAH because of cultural reasons, but also because of, you know, the fact that the parents are both working and they're struggling. And FARAH is older than Samir. She's several years older than Samir. But the other way that FARAH is protective of Samir is that he has some learning challenges. He was a preemie. He was born very early. And so he has some learning challenges. And so people judge him all the time. And she knows how smart he is. And so she's always feeling very defensive of him. So she's protective of him physically, but also in lots of other ways, like socially and emotionally as well. And she's a really wise kid. You know, she understands how people view her brother and view her family. So she's got a lot to consider and worry about.
Yes. And as often happens in family dynamics, right? And one of the things that I love about middle grade, writing it and reading it, is, often middle grade really focuses on family and how our family environment molds us in ways for better or worse, and how young people can triumph over the challenges of their family dynamic, and also embrace some elements of family that speak to who they are. And, all of us are the products of who we are because, for many reasons, including the family dynamic that we grew up in, and with all its good and all its bad, right? So,
and the cultures we grew up in too,
yes,
the
absolutely.
ethnic backgrounds that we have a lot to do with that too.
Absolutely. And it all informs everything else, right?
Yep.
So in closing, as we're nearing the end, we had a question, and I sent it to you earlier, so hopefully you have time to think about it. If not, you're totally on the spot. So a librarian, Kate in Massachusetts, asked, I thought this was a very good question. If someone were to write a book about your experience growing up, specifically as a sibling, what would the title of the book be? So, by the way, I hate coming up with titles. It's one of my least favorite parts of writing. I want someone else to title all my books for me. So,
me too.
did anyone come up with something really, compelling, not to put pressure on you? Something brilliant. It must be brilliant. No, I'm just kidding.
It's not brilliant. It's not brilliant, and it's probably not compelling, but I would call my book The View from the Top Bunk, because at one point I shared a bedroom. We had a tiny house and my aunt moved in with us, and I shared a tiny 11 by 11 foot bedroom with 3 boys, with my brothers.
Wow.
And we had a bunk bed, and I got the top bunk, and that was my kingdom up there. Nobody could penetrate this fortress of my top bunk. So I would call it The View from the Top Bunk.
That is really good. I think that's compelling and brilliant.
Thank you.
Sarah or Renee?
So I thought this morning after that email, I was like, I don't know if it's compelling, but I think I would go with It's a Small World, because for a couple of reasons. Because when there's so many of you, it really is like there are cultural differences, and there are kingdoms at war, and then there are peace treaties and alliances. So it is this whole clashing of cultures in some ways. And then also every single summer growing up, Disneyland has always been my family's top happy place. So, the double meaning there.
Very good. Yeah. See, these are good. Okay, Renee, now you got to follow that up.
I should have gone first. Because like you, Erin, titles are the hardest for me. Oh my goodness. There's a line in the book, In Ways to Make Sunshine, that I'm going to borrow. And it is, home is not a place. And so that's what I would call it, because of that age difference, right? My brother had already gone off to college in the Marines when I was only like 3 years old. And my other sisters graduated and moved out of the house. So in some ways I'm a sibling, and in other ways I was the only child. I grew up, all my high school years was just me and my mom. But wherever they were and wherever I went to visit them or hang out with them, I always felt that we were carrying home with us, even though we didn't all grow up in the same house.
See, those are amazing. Those are all really good. Mine is just night and day. That's all I could come up with, because my sister and I are like night and day. So I want to thank each and every one of you for being on this panel with me. I want to thank all the viewers out there. And I absolutely want to thank the volunteers for Everywhere Book Fest for making this possible. It's a ton of work, and it's incredible what they've done. So thank you for coming to the It's All Relative panel at Everywhere Book Fest, and I wish you a happy virtual online festival. Bye.
Thank you.